Alright, as I explore some of the other painting tools within Mudbox, there's some very, very cool options within here. So let's just go and actually apply a little bit more color here again. And let's modify this. So we'll paint around a little bit more. Let's try some blue. Alright, so we have some pretty basic color on our object. Now, the hue shift brush allows me basically with that number there, the hue shift, it just kind of pushes the colors into the next range of the spectrum. So I can get some pretty cool results. Now I also have paint erase, which does exactly that. It just erases the paint. The pencil, slightly different brush there. The airbrush. Now the airbrush is not my favorite tool. What it does is it basically just kind of splatters paint around. And as we get in here a little bit closer, you'll see that it just kind of overlaps almost a small version of the stroke. So it takes it a little bit longer to kind of pile up. But the downside, in my opinion, is that we get these kind of rings. And I just don't like that look. So for some things, this might be a great tool. And as you're combining it over other parts of the mesh or other parts of the paint, you don't really notice that so much. Now, for some things it's good, some things it's bad. We can always go back with the blur brush and soften that all up. So we can get rid of that kind of edgy, rounded pattern, but personally I would rather not really worry too much about that. So let's try some other tools here. Dodge is going to lighten things up. Burn is going to darken them. Contrast is going to do that, where it basically just increases the contrast between the colors that are underneath my brush. The sponge is going to increase or decrease saturation. So on control, it's going to increase the saturation, where with it just standard, it decreases. Hue is going to basically shove the colors underneath into the hue that I've selected. Clone allows me to control click to define an area and then paint to a new area. So we'll grab from over there, we'll paint some of that purple up into here. The eyedropper allows me to pick and sample a color that's on my object. Then I can go back to something like the paintbrush, and it has that color now. Invert basically just inverts the color scheme to the opposite extreme. Dry brush. Dry brush is a very cool tool that allows me to use whatever color it is, but the way it works, and let's decrease the strength and the size a bit. And as I brush over the top, you see that the dry brush tool only paints on the raised surfaces. So it's a nice way to be able to add a different color or highlights onto the tops of my objects. Now, the reverse is also true, where if we pick a much darker color, and I hold on control, it'll paint into the shadows or the low spots of my object. So we can get some pretty cool effects using things like that. And then I go back to the paintbrush, and then as I paint over, I'll just kind of start to subtly add that color back in. So I can just add a little bit back over the top and kind of tint everything. Then we go back to our dry brush with that dark color, decrease our strength a bit more. Then as I hold on control to paint back into those shadows, I can just darken up that green down in the shadows and keep some of the tint of it. Alright, the only paint tool that we haven't really looked at yet is the projection brush. Now the projection brush is supposed to work with a stencil, so we're going to go to stencil and we're going to just grab the grass texture. Now, it's pretty cool because I can still move my object around underneath that stencil, but I have specific tools for working with the stencil itself. So if I hold on the S key, as I move around in here, I can do different things with that brush or with that stencil. Then, as I paint, I'm just painting right through that stencil onto my object. So you move the object around, paint a little bit more, move the object around, and we can keep basically applying that grass texture across our object. So as I work around the corners, I want to try to make sure that my corner is as, I guess, straight on to the material as possible. Because as I go to paint like the top here through that grass, it might look okay from this view, but now as we look around the top, if I turn the stencil off, I see how streaked that got through the top of the object. So I need to continually make sure that I'm trying to basically paint almost flat on to any given surface. So I have, or at least control the amount of streaking through the surface. So as I get to an edge, I want to try to have the edge basically flat onto my view plane. And then we paint through that area and continually just move around the object to paint a new spot. Now, depending on the material that you're using as your stencil, you'll get better or worse results. So you need to pay attention to what you're using as a stencil in order to minimize any problems that can occur. Again, experiment. Mess around with those tools. We can go back to the hue shift now, turn our stencil back off, and we can start, again, messing around with a lot of the different options that are here with our paint tools. So we can continue to just keep modifying and making adjustments to anything we've put down on that surface.